The year was 2047, and the world had never seen anything like it before. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and watched as something impossible appeared in the darkness of space. The object was massive, and it hung there above Earth like a silver mountain turned on its side. Every screen in the command center lit up with warnings and alerts as the unknown vessel materialized without any signal or warning. Jake felt his heart racing as he grabbed the communication device and started sending emergency broadcasts to every military base on the planet. Within minutes, the entire world knew that something had arrived from beyond the stars. For 3 full days, the alien ship just floated there in orbit and did nothing at all. Scientists tried every method they could think of to make contact but received no response. Military forces around the globe went on high alert, and people everywhere looked up at the sky with fear and wonder mixed together in their hearts. Jake barely slept during those 72 hours as he monitored the vessel constantly and waited for something to happen. Then on the 4th day, everything changed in the worst possible way. The massive ship began to fall. Jake watched in horror as the alien vessel started dropping toward Earth, and its hull began glowing bright red from the heat of entering the atmosphere. He tried to send warnings, but there was nothing anyone could do to stop what was happening. The ship fell faster and faster until it disappeared from his view behind the curve of the planet. Minutes later, reports came, flooding in from the Nevada desert where the vessel had crashed into the sand and rock with tremendous force. When the rescue teams finally reached the crash site, they found something that took their breath away. The alien ship had carved a trench through the desert that stretched for 50 miles in a straight line, and the sand had been turned into glass from the incredible heat. The vessel itself was broken and torn open in many places, and smoke rose from the damaged sections into the clear desert sky. Military personnel secured the area while scientists in protective suits approached the wreckage carefully and prepared to enter the unknown ship. Jake flew down from the orbital station as fast as he could and arrived at the crash site within hours. He joined the first exploration team that went inside the alien vessel, and what they discovered changed everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. The interior of the ship was dark and cold, and their flashlights revealed corridors that seemed to go on forever in both directions. The walls were made of some kind of material that felt smooth like metal, but had patterns that looked almost organic. As they moved deeper into the ship, they found the bodies. The aliens were dead and had been for some time based on what the medical experts could determine. They looked somewhat like humans, but taller and thinner, with skin that had strange markings which might have glowed when they were alive. There were dozens of bodies throughout the ship, and each one told a silent story of desperation and fear. The exploration teams treated the dead aliens with respect as they documented everything and tried to understand what had happened to these visitors from another world. Dr. Lisa Campbell was the lead scientist assigned to study the wreckage, and she worked day and night to unlock the secrets of the alien technology. She was a brilliant woman who specialized in ancient languages and unknown writing systems. When she found the ship's data storage systems, she knew this was the most important discovery of her career. The alien computers were still partially functional despite the crash, and they contained vast amounts of information. Lisa worked with a team of programmers and linguists to create translation programs that could make sense of the alien language. After weeks of constant work, they finally succeeded in translating some of the ship's logs. What they learned was terrifying. The vessel was called the Valdris, and it had been fleeing from something when it crashed on Earth. The logs described a great war that had been raging across distant star systems for many years. The aliens who built the Valdris belonged to something called the Krell Empire, and they had been losing their war against an enemy known only as the Devourers. The final log entries were desperate messages from the dying crew describing how their faster-than-light drive had malfunctioned during an emergency escape and stranded them in an unknown region of space. Lisa brought her findings to the President of the United States and soon after to the leaders of every major nation on Earth. President Catherine Wade listened carefully as Lisa explained what the Valdris logs revealed about the dangers that existed beyond Earth's solar system. The Devourers were described as something that consumed everything in their path and grew stronger with each world they conquered. The Krell had fought them for 3 generations but were losing ground with each passing year. The president made a decision that would define the future of humanity. She stood before the United Nations and proposed something that seemed impossible. Instead of just studying the crashed alien ship, humanity would attempt to repair it and make it fly again. She called it Project Rebirth and said it would require cooperation from every nation on Earth. Many people thought the idea was crazy and argued that trying to use alien technology might attract unwanted attention from hostile forces, but others saw an opportunity that might never come again. Jake found himself assigned to Project Rebirth as one of the military coordinators. He watched as the Nevada desert transformed into the largest construction site in human history almost overnight. Engineers and scientists from every country arrived to study the Valdris and figure out how to bring it back to life. Massive cranes and equipment surrounded the crashed vessel as work began to cut away the damaged sections and understand how the alien systems functioned. The work was incredibly difficult because the Krell technology operated on principles that human science barely understood. Their power systems used energy in ways that seemed impossible, and their materials could repair themselves under the right conditions. Every day brought new discoveries and new challenges as the teams worked to unlock the secrets of the Starship. Jake walked through the construction site and marveled at what humanity was attempting to accomplish. People who spoke different languages and came from different cultures worked side by side with a common purpose. As the months passed, Jake began to believe that maybe humanity could actually succeed in this impossible task. The crashed alien ship represented both a warning and an opportunity. Somewhere out in the darkness of space, the Devourers were still out there and might one day follow the trail that led to Earth. But now humanity had a chance to prepare for that day and maybe even take the fight to the enemy before they arrived. The Valdris would fly again, but when it did, it would carry human hopes and dreams along with the legacy of the fallen Krell. 3 years had passed since the Valdris crashed in the Nevada desert, and the entire region looked completely different now. What had once been empty sand and rock was now filled with buildings and equipment and thousands of people working around the clock. Giant metal structures surrounded the alien ship like a skeleton of steel and concrete, while cranes moved massive pieces of machinery into position. The work never stopped because teams from different time zones took shifts so that progress continued every single hour of every single day. Chief Engineer Ryan Foster was in charge of making the impossible become reality. He was a man who had spent 20 years building ships and stations for space exploration, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this challenge. The Krell technology was so far beyond human understanding that sometimes Ryan felt like a child trying to rebuild a computer using only stone tools. Every system on the Valdris operated according to principles that human physics could barely explain. Their power cores used something called controlled quantum fluctuations, which sounded simple, but required mathematics that made his head hurt. The hull material could actually reorganize itself at the molecular level to repair damage, which seemed more like magic than science. Ryan stood in front of his engineering team during one of their daily meetings and explained the biggest problem they faced. They could not simply copy what the Krell had built because humanity did not have the manufacturing capabilities or the understanding to replicate their technology exactly. Instead, they needed to figure out how to make Krell systems work alongside human technology and hope that the combination would be enough. It was like trying to wire a car engine into a spaceship and expecting both to work together perfectly. The breakthrough came from a scientist named Dr. Henry Yu, who worked at the Beijing Institute of Advanced Physics. Henry had been studying the Krell power cores for months and trying to understand how they generated so much energy from such a small space. One night while reviewing data, he noticed something interesting about the frequency patterns in the quantum fluctuations. He realized that the Krell cores needed a massive surge of energy to start them up, and that human fusion reactors might be able to provide exactly that kind of power. Henry sent his findings to Ryan, who immediately assembled a team to test the theory. It took 6 weeks of careful work to connect a modified fusion reactor to one of the Valdris power cores. The entire engineering staff gathered in the main hangar to watch as Henry activated the system for the first time. Everyone held their breath as energy flowed from the human reactor into the alien core. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Ryan felt his hopes beginning to sink. Then the core began to glow with a soft blue light, and instruments showed power levels rising steadily. Suddenly, lights flickered on throughout entire sections of the Valdris that had been dark since the crash. People started cheering and hugging each other as they realized they had just brought part of an alien Starship back to life. While Ryan and his teams worked on the physical systems, another group was trying to communicate with the ship's computer. Dr. Claire Morris was a linguist who specialized in artificial intelligence and machine learning. She had been working with the Valdris data system since the beginning and had made slow but steady progress in understanding how the alien computers processed information. The ship had been partially autonomous, meaning it could think and make decisions on its own to some degree. Claire discovered that the computer core contained something that acted like a digital personality, and she spent months trying to establish communication with it. The AI identified itself as Sentinel-7, and it became humanity's teacher in understanding Krell technology. Through careful translation work, Claire created programs that allowed Sentinel-7 to communicate in English and answer questions about how the Valdris systems worked. The AI explained things in ways that humans could understand and helped bridge the enormous gap between Krell science and human engineering. Sentinel-7 also contained vast libraries of information about the Krell Empire and the wider galaxy beyond Earth. What Sentinel-7 revealed was both fascinating and terrifying. The Krell Empire had controlled 40 star systems before the Devourers appeared and started their campaign of destruction. The Devourers were not a normal species, but something more like a hive mind that consumed both biological life and technology to grow stronger. They could not be reasoned with or negotiated with because they existed only to expand and consume everything in their path. The Krell had fought them for 3 full generations, but had lost world after world until their empire collapsed. Captain Nicole Grant had been selected to command the Valdris once it was ready to fly again. She was a veteran pilot who had commanded exploration missions to Mars and the outer planets. Nicole spent her days learning everything she could about Krell technology and preparing for the responsibility of leading humanity's first starship into the unknown. She sat down with Sentinel-7 one afternoon and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. How long would it take before the Devourers found Earth and came to destroy humanity, like they had destroyed the Krell? Sentinel-7's answer sent chills through everyone who heard it. The AI explained that when the Valdris made its emergency jump to escape the Devourers, it had left a gravitational wake in space that could potentially be tracked. If the Devourers followed that wake, they would eventually find Earth. It might take years or even decades, but sooner or later they would come. The AI said this with the same calm tone it used for everything, but Nicole understood the weight of those words. Humanity was living on borrowed time. The pace of work on the Valdris increased dramatically after that revelation. Human weapon systems were installed throughout the ship alongside the repaired Krell weapons. The original particle beam arrays that the Krell had used were supplemented with railguns and missile batteries, designed by human military engineers. The fighter bays were modified to carry human-built interceptors instead of Krell assault craft. Every available space was used to add armor and weapons and systems that might give them an edge in combat. The faster-than-light drive presented the biggest challenge of all. The original Krell drive had been destroyed beyond any hope of repair in the crash. Dr. Yu worked with engineers from 6 different countries to design a hybrid system that combined human theoretical physics with what they had learned from Krell technology. They built prototype after prototype, and each one failed in a different way. Some exploded during testing, while others simply did nothing at all. It took 18 months of constant failure before they finally achieved a successful test jump to the edge of the solar system and back again. The Valdris was changing as they rebuilt it. While the ship kept its elegant curved design that the Krell had created, humanity added their own touches everywhere. Additional armor plating covered vulnerable areas, and redundant backup systems were installed for every critical function. The life support was upgraded to human standards, and new crew quarters were built inside the massive hull. The ship was becoming something new that belonged to both civilizations equally. The Retribution lifted off from Earth on a clear morning, 6 years after the Valdris had crashed in the Nevada desert. Captain Nicole Grant sat in the command chair and watched through the view screen as the planet grew smaller beneath them. The rebuilt Starship climbed through the atmosphere on pillars of blue-white fire that could be seen from 1,000 miles away. 5,000 crew members from 37 different nations worked at their stations throughout the massive vessel, and every one of them knew they might be flying toward their deaths. The world watched and held its breath as humanity's first starship left home and headed into the unknown darkness of space. Their mission was to find out what they were really facing before the Devourers reached Earth. Nicole had convinced the leadership back home that waiting for the enemy to arrive was a mistake. They needed to understand what kind of threat was coming and hopefully find a way to stop it. Sentinel-7 had provided coordinates for several Krell worlds that had fallen during the war and the Retribution would visit. These places to gather intelligence and search for anything that might help them survive. The first jump through faster than light space was an experience that nobody on board would ever forget. The hybrid drive that Dr. Yu had designed worked differently than the original Krell system. Instead of a smooth transition, the human version felt like being pulled in 1,000 directions at once for a brief moment before reality snapped back into place. When they emerged from the jump, they were light years from Earth in a region of space that no human had ever seen before. The crew cheered and celebrated because they had just proven that humanity could travel between the stars. The first Krell world they reached was called Theraxis Prime, and what they found there made everyone on the Retribution feel sick. The planet had once been beautiful according to the records that Sentinel-7 showed them, but now it was a graveyard. The cities that covered the surface were nothing but ruins, with their towers collapsed and their streets empty. The oceans were filled with dead organic matter that had turned the water a sickly gray color. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of the Devourers and what they did to the worlds they conquered. Lieutenant Peter Kane led a team of Marines down to the surface to investigate. They landed near what had been a Krell research facility and carefully made their way through the damaged buildings. The air was toxic, so they kept their helmets sealed and moved slowly through the debris. Inside the main research building, they found computers that were still partially functional, and Peter immediately called for Dr. Lisa Campbell to come down from the ship. Lisa arrived with her technical team and started downloading data from the Krell computers. What she discovered was more important than anyone had dared to hope. The Krell scientists at this facility had been working on a weapon specifically designed to fight the Devourers. They called it the Harmonic Disruptor, and the basic idea was brilliant. The Devourers operated as a hive mind, which meant all their individual units were connected through some kind of quantum frequency. If you could disrupt that frequency, the entire collective would collapse like a house of cards. The weapon was theoretically capable of destroying the Devourers completely, but the Krell had never finished building it. Lisa brought the data back to the Retribution and presented her findings to Captain Grant and the senior staff. The room was silent as everyone absorbed what they were hearing. They had found a way to win, but the weapon had never been completed because the Devourers had overrun the facility before the Krell could finish their work. Nicole made her decision quickly. Humanity would finish what the Krell had started and build the Harmonic Disruptor themselves. The Retribution prepared to leave Theraxis Prime and continue their mission, but the sensors detected something approaching fast. Multiple contacts were emerging from faster-than-light travel and heading straight toward them. The crew went to battle stations and weapons were charged as everyone prepared for their first encounter with the Devourers. Nicole stood on the bridge and watched the tactical display as dozens of ships appeared on the screen. Then the identification systems gave them unexpected news. The ships were Krell vessels and they were signaling for communication. The lead ship was barely holding together and showed signs of extensive damage from many battles. Its hull was scarred and whole sections looked like they might fall off at any moment. A face appeared on the view screen and Nicole found herself looking at a living Krell for the first time. He was thin and looked exhausted, but his bioluminescent markings pulsed with a pale blue light. He spoke in his own language, which Sentinel-7 translated instantly for the human crew. The Krell commander identified himself as Fleet Marshal Torin and asked how they had come to possess a ship with the Valdris signature. Nicole explained that the Valdris had crashed on Earth and humanity had rebuilt it. She told him they had come to finish what the Krell Empire had started and defeat the Devourers once and for all. Marshal Torin was silent for a long moment and his markings changed to bright green, which Sentinel-7 identified as shock and hope mixed together. Over the next several hours, Marshal Torin brought his fleet of 17 damaged ships alongside the Retribution. The meeting that followed in the conference room was historic because it was the first time humans and aliens had spoken face-to-face as equals. Torin explained that the Krell Empire had fallen completely and only scattered groups of survivors remained. They had been running and hiding for years while the Devourers grew stronger and conquered more worlds. His fleet represented less than 500 combat-ready ships against the thousands that the Devourers now controlled. Nicole shared what they had found on Thraxis Prime and showed Torin the data about the harmonic disruptor. The Krell commander's markings flashed brilliant gold, and Sentinel-7 said this meant extreme excitement. Torin explained that the research facility on Thraxis had been legendary among Krell military leaders, but everyone had assumed all the data was lost when the planet fell. Now humanity had given them hope for the first time in years. An alliance was formed right there in that conference room. The surviving Krell would share everything they knew about fighting the Devourers and their remaining technology. In return, humanity would provide resources and the determination to see the fight through to the end. Torin warned them that time was running short because long-range sensors showed Devourer scout ships pushing into new sectors of space. They were searching and expanding and moving closer to the region where Earth was located. If humanity wanted to save their world, they needed to build the weapon quickly and strike before the enemy found them first. The combined fleet of human and Krell ships found shelter in a place called the Helix Nebula, where dense clouds of stellar dust hid them from enemy sensors. This region of space became their secret base where they would race against time to build the harmonic disruptor before the Devourers found them. The Retribution anchored itself near the center of the nebula, while the Krell vessels spread out to provide early warning if any enemy ships approached. Everyone knew they were working on borrowed time, but they pushed forward with determination that surprised even themselves. Dr. Lisa Campbell worked side by side with Krell scientists in the Retribution's main laboratory. The cultural differences between humans and Krell were vast, but they found common ground in their shared love of science and their desperate need to survive. The weapon's design was elegant in theory, but building it proved to be incredibly complex in practice. They needed a power source equal to a small star and crystalline focusing arrays that had to be grown in zero gravity over many months. Every component had to be perfect, because even the smallest flaw would cause the entire system to fail. Marshal Torin met regularly with Captain Nicole Grant to discuss strategy and plan for what would come after they completed the weapon. The Krell commander explained that even if they successfully built the harmonic disruptor, they still faced an enormous problem. The weapon needed to be deployed at the heart of Devourer territory, where their central nexus controlled the entire hive mind. That nexus was protected by hundreds of ships and orbital weapons platforms. Fighting through those defenses would be almost impossible for their small fleet. Commander Jake Harrison had an idea that might solve their problem. He proposed using the Retribution's unique hybrid faster-than-light drive to perform a series of micro-jumps that would bypass the Devourer fleet entirely. Each jump would last only a few seconds and would move them a short distance through space. By calculating the jumps precisely, they could thread between the enemy ships and arrive at the nexus without fighting through the entire fleet. The plan was extremely dangerous because one miscalculation could leave them inside a planet or a star. Lieutenant Peter Kane spoke up during the strategy meeting and said bluntly that the plan was suicide. The margin for error was practically zero, and they would have no room for mistakes. Nicole looked around the table at her senior staff and the Krell commanders who had joined them. She knew Peter was right, but she also knew they had no better options. They needed to take this chance because it was the only one they had. While the weapon slowly took shape in the laboratory, the Retribution made 2 trips back to Earth to gather additional supplies and reinforcements. Nicole used these visits to see how much the world had changed in the time since they left. The nations of Earth had truly unified in a way that nobody had thought possible. Shipyards orbited the planet and the Moon and Mars, and they were all building warships based on Krell designs. Admiral Stephen Porter, who now commanded Earth's defense fleet, met with Nicole during her second visit home. The Admiral explained that they were building as fast as humanly possible, but even if the Devourers arrived tomorrow, they would only have 40 ships ready for combat. Earth needed more time to prepare its defenses, and that meant the Retribution's mission was more critical than ever. Nicole promised him that they would buy Earth that time no matter what it cost them. She knew the people back home were depending on her and her crew to keep the enemy away long enough for humanity to prepare. 8 months after they began work in the Helix Nebula, the harmonic disruptor was finally complete. The device was enormous and took up most of the Retribution's cargo bay. Dr. Lisa ran final tests on every component, while Krell technicians made microscopic adjustments to the focusing arrays. The power requirements were staggering, and they would need to drain energy from every system on the ship to fire the weapon. It would leave them defenseless for several minutes while the disruptor charged, but that was a risk they had to accept. Disaster struck just days before they planned to launch their mission. A Devourer probe ship stumbled into the Helix Nebula by pure chance. The Krell vessels destroyed it before it could transmit any messages, but the damage was already done. The Devourers would know something had destroyed their probe and they would send ships to investigate. Marshal Torren estimated they had perhaps 3 days before a full enemy fleet arrived at their location. The combined fleet worked frantically to prepare for departure, but they ran out of time. Sensors detected massive energy signatures emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the nebula. 20 Devourer capital ships, each 3 times the size of the Retribution, appeared, along with swarms of smaller attack craft. The organic-mechanical hybrids were grotesque, to look at, with pulsing flesh covering chitinous armor and weapons that had been grown from corrupted technology. The battle began immediately, and it was more desperate than anything the humans had ever experienced. The Krell survivors fought with the skill born from years of warfare, and their ships danced through space executing complex maneuvers. Human weapons crews on the Retribution proved their worth as railguns and missiles tore into Devourer vessels. But they were badly outnumbered, and everyone knew they could not win this fight. One by one, the Krell ships took damage and began to fall. Marshal Torren's flagship was hit by a massive plasma blast that tore its port side completely open. The Krell commander contacted the Retribution through the damaged communication system. His voice was weak but determined as he told Nicole that she needed to take the Retribution and escape immediately. The Devourers had called for reinforcements, and more enemy ships would arrive soon. The Krell would buy as much time as they could, but the mission had to continue. Nicole refused to leave without evacuating the Krell survivors, but Torren insisted there was no time. Captain Grant made the hardest decision of her entire life. She ordered all Krell personnel to evacuate to the Retribution, while their ships formed a defensive screen around the human vessel. Just under 200 Krell managed to transfer across before the enemy pressed too close. The Retribution's faster-than-light drive began spinning up to full power as Nicole watched the view screen. The Krell ships charged straight at the Devourer fleet, with all weapons firing, and bought the precious seconds needed for escape. Marshal Torren's final transmission came through, just before the Retribution jumped. He told Nicole to inform humanity that the Krell died believing in their future, and to finish what they had started together. Then the communication cut off as his ship exploded in a brilliant flash. The Retribution jumped away and left the nebula behind. Nicole sat in her command chair with tears running down her face as she realized what the Krell had sacrificed so humanity could have its chance. The crew of the Retribution mourned their fallen Krell allies, but they had no time to grieve properly. They carried the harmonic disruptor and the location of the Devourer central nexus, and a promise made to dying heroes who had sacrificed everything for a chance at victory. Captain Nicole Grant assembled her senior staff in the conference room, and everyone understood that this was their final planning session before the mission that would decide the fate of 2 civilizations. Commander Jake Harrison presented the jump calculations that would take them to the heart of enemy territory. He had plotted 14 separate micro-jumps, and each one would last less than 3 seconds. They would thread between stars and nebulas and Devourer patrol routes with no margin for error. If even one calculation was wrong by the smallest amount, they could emerge inside solid matter and be destroyed instantly. The navigation team had checked and rechecked every number, but everyone knew that some risks could not be eliminated no matter how careful they were. Nicole opened a ship-wide communication channel and spoke to every crew member on the Retribution. She told them about the Krell sacrifice and the weapon they carried and the responsibility that now rested on all their shoulders. The people of Earth were depending on them, and the surviving Krell were trusting them to finish what had been started years ago on Theraxis Prime. They would get one shot at using the harmonic disruptor, and failure was not an option they could afford to consider. The journey to the Devourer Nexus took 6 days of careful jumping through space. Each micro-jump was a test of nerves as the navigation team made split-second calculations and adjustments. They passed through star systems that had been consumed by the Devourers and witnessed the horror of what the enemy did to conquered worlds. Entire civilizations had been reduced to organic processing centers that fed the hive mind's endless hunger. The crew saw planets covered in pulsing biomechanical growths and understood exactly what awaited Earth if they failed. On the 7th day, they arrived at their destination, The Devourer Nexus existed in a binary star system, where two suns orbited each other in an eternal dance. At the center of the system floated a structure so massive and so alien that human minds struggled to comprehend it. Part biological and part technological, it pulsed with dark energy and stretched tendrils of organic matter between planets like a spider's web. This was the heart of the Devourer Collective, where the hive mind coordinated its empire of consumption and death. The Nexus was protected by a fleet that made their hearts sink. Over 300 ships orbited the central structure in layers of defensive positions. Lieutenant Peter Kane looked at the tactical display and stated what everyone was thinking. They could not fight through that many enemies even if they had 100 ships. Nicole reminded him that they did not need to fight the fleet. They only needed to get close enough to deploy the harmonic disruptor, and its range was 10 million kilometers. Dr. Lisa Campbell confirmed that once they got within range, the weapon's pulse would reach the Nexus and destroy the quantum frequency that held the hive mind together. Commander Harrison plotted one final jump that would take them directly into the heart of the system in low orbit, above the Nexus structure itself. They would have minutes or maybe only seconds before every Devourer ship turned toward them, but it would be enough time to deploy the weapon. Nicole gave the order, and every crew member went to battle stations throughout the Retribution. The lights dimmed as power was routed to critical systems. People checked their equipment one last time and said quiet prayers or good luck wishes to those around them. The faster-than-light drive spun up and space began to tear open in front of the ship. Then they jumped into what everyone knew might be their final battle. The Retribution emerged from the jump in low orbit directly above the Devourer Nexus. Alarms immediately started screaming as every enemy ship in the system detected their presence and began turning toward them. Nicole shouted for Lisa to deploy the weapon, and all around the bridge crew members worked frantically at their stations. The harmonic disruptor began powering up and drawing energy from every system on the ship. The Retribution's lights dimmed to almost nothing as power flowed into the weapon. Devourer ships converged on their position from all directions. Plasma fire started raking across the shields, and the ship shuddered under the assault. Human and Krell crew members died at their posts as sections of the hull were breached, but nobody abandoned their stations. Lisa called out the charge percentage as it climbed steadily toward full power. More Devourer vessels arrived every second, and the damage to the Retribution was becoming critical. Commander Harrison warned that they were losing structural integrity in multiple sections. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the ship as atmosphere vented into space. Nicole gripped her command chair and ordered everyone to hold together just a little longer. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to fail when victory was within reach. The harmonic disruptor reached full charge, and Lisa's hands moved over the activation controls. She pressed the firing sequence, and the weapon released its pulse into space. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen, and Nicole felt fear grip her heart. Then reality itself appeared to ripple outward from the Retribution in an invisible wave. The pulse of quantum disruption spread at the speed of light and touched everything in its path. The Devourer ships simply stopped. Their weapons went silent, and their engines died, and the organic parts of their hulls began to decay as the hive mind's control was severed. The massive Nexus structure convulsed like a dying animal. The tendrils connecting the planet started dissolving, and the entire construction began tearing itself apart. Nicole watched in awe as trillions of tons of corrupted matter and technology collapsed without the quantum bonds, holding the collective together. Throughout all of Devourer-controlled space, the same scene played out. Ships went dark and outposts crumbled, and assimilated worlds began the slow process of healing as the hive mind's influence vanished forever. On the bridge of the Retribution, silence fell as everyone realized what they had accomplished. Then Lieutenant Kane's voice broke through the quiet. He reported that all Devourer signatures were going offline across every sector they could scan. The crew erupted in celebration. People hugged each other and cried and laughed all at the same time. Dr. Lisa slumped in her chair, completely exhausted from the months of work that had led to this moment. Nicole opened a channel to Earth and transmitted the message that everyone back home was desperately waiting to hear. The mission was accomplished, and the Devourers were finished. The response from Admiral Porter came back after the long minutes it took for signals to cross the distance. His voice was thick with emotion as he welcomed them home. But the Retribution did not return to Earth immediately. Under Nicole's orders, the ship spent 6 months traveling through former Devourer territory and broadcasting messages to any survivors. Krell and human and species they had never encountered before all received the same invitation to join them in building something new.